everyone. Happy New Year. It is 2020, and thank you for tuning into this segment of Black Spring with Autumn. It is the first segment of Black Spring with Autumn, and I would just like to welcome everyone here, and I'd like to help you kick off your 2020 and empower you with more civic literacy and more things to empower us as sovereigns and as American patriots. So, welcome back to this very first segment of Black Spring with Autumn. And I would like to kick off the season with a couple of articles that I've encountered, and I'm sure that you will find them to be very interesting, considering the fact that we have so much global opposition these days. And much of that global opposition, of course, is coming from the globalist, the left, as well as the UN. There's a huge push, of course, coming from the Vatican and the Pope to surrender our actual sovereignties. And basically, the Pope is declaring, nation states are no longer adequate to avoid, I guess, human rights or the human tragedies, or just general, just basically human rights violations is what he is purporting in his position, and basically promoting globalism and one world and one state government. So that there's a very big push where that's concerned. In fact, if you will go with me here, we'll go very briefly to basically back in the last spring that Pope Francis was calling for an end of sovereignty and the establishment of global government. And that's pretty consistent with what President Trump has been fighting, and basically declaring, even President Trump at the beginning of the UN agenda's General Assembly, he basically said, that the future belongs to patriots and not to globalism. However, we've gotten all this opposition, especially when it comes to this whole climate crisis, the climate faith. There's a big push. These things are as big of a push as for our 2020 election season. So I've said before that I do believe that our president his opponent is very well he is a global opponent with the global crisis faith or global climate faith that the Pope is pushing. And he's also fighting the left, which the left and the AOCs and the propaganda arms of the Democrat Party are very well in step with the UN agenda and the UN agenda's interest. So if you don't mind taking a quick look with me here, you will be able to see we have an article. And in this article, you will see that basically just kind of, we're going to recap back into the article. This article was written by Joe Wolverton II, JD. And I'm just quoting here. At a meeting of the Pontifical Academy held recently, Pope Francis advocated a policy of decreased national sovereignty and increased global unity. A shift towards globalism is necessary, he said, in order to fight climate change and other worldwide threats. Now, quote here, when a supranational common good is clearly identified, it is necessary to have a special authority legally and concordantly constituted capable of facilitating its implementation. We think of the great contemporary challenges of climate change, new forms of slavery and peace. Quote, His Holiness told those gathered to discuss, quote, nation state and nation state, the conference theme. Okay, it continues here, basically, with the Pope Francis putting his fine point on his message, and I'm paraphrasing here, claiming that the planetary problems are exacerbated by an excessive, quote, an excessive demand for sovereignty on the part of states, end quote. And it's, of course, it says he moves on to immigration, declaring that nationalism is too easily twisted into a doctrine repugnant to the welcoming of immigrants. Quote, the church observes with concern the reemergence in many parts of the world of currents that are aggressive towards foreigners, especially immigrants, as well as a growing nationalism that neglects the common good, end quote, Pope Francis said. So, just to keep things a little bit here in perspective, I've done quite a few videos that spoke to actual what the UN Agenda 2030 is, and basically that's the man behind the curtain, is actually your climate crisis, your climate change now, your climate faith. It's morphed into climate faith, and these are basically pushes of one world government. And that's the opposition that the president has faced. That's what the facilitating of these public-private partnerships with these globalists, AOC and the new Green Deal. It's more or less about a wealth redistribution. And there's much contempt already for the president because the UN and the NATO's and these allies seem to think that America should just continue to foot the bill, or America should subsidize the entire world, which is a system that we've already been involved in for many decades, even post World War. Even these other nations, these European or Western European nations, they've seen prosperity, but they've also squandered their prosperity in loss of value, losing their own sovereignties, mass migrations, these secular values and the social protections. Those things have ultimately suppressed their economies, and their GDPs have either been stagnant or flat, unfortunately for them. But they want to do, at the meantime, the Pope and all of these globalists frown upon capitalism, and their agent of change, Greta Thunberg, coming into the States, basically saying that capitalism is some sort of fairy tale, but yet those nations, the UN and NATO, they all have benefited from American capitalism. So it's a contradiction. It's very much a scam, and it's very admirable and very courageous that President Trump has stood up for American values and American taxpayers and saying, this will not stand. It's also important that American patriots reach out to your senators and to your representatives and say, hey, these groups, these allies, the UN, these organizations are not in step with our values. They are slicing off sovereignty. They are looking for ways to infiltrate and to change our way of life into something that would basically suppress our economies. The Paris Agreement or the Paris Accord, the H.R. 9, that particular agreement, President Trump pulled us out of that particular agreement. And ever since then, it's been a nonstop attack. The U.S., they need the U.S.'s capitalism, yet they need to mock it in order to support their own narrative. Even if it's not true, even if it's not with real science, they need to do that. So that's basically kind of that's a scope of of the quotes and what's going on. In fact, we even have the indoctrination, not only in the UN agenda for education, where I've mentioned in previous videos, where their goal for education is that the children are the agents of change. They are promoting sexuality and adding to curriculums for children as early as age 5. They are teaching sexuality. It's at the forefront of their educational agenda, the UN. And then they're going to go a step further, and they've already implemented in Italy. We have another article here that we could take a look at. This particular article this article was written by Michael Tennant. This was back in November, that Italy is to mandate, quote, climate change instruction for all students. So here you have can see another example. It says Italy will become the first country in the world to mandate that schools indoctrinate students in the climate change agenda. Education Minister Lorenzo Fioramonti announced recently. Fioramonti, a member of the left-wing Five Star Movement who wants schools to remove crucifixes from their classrooms, has no problem introducing what he admits is a, quote, Trojan horse that will infiltrate all schools' courses with climate change faith, according to the New York Times. In addition, you can see more of Fioramonti's mandate, which he claims is permitted under law passed last year, requires students to have 33 hours of climate change and environmentally sustainability instruction each school year beginning next September, reported the paper. Quote, that 33-hour-a-year lesson, he said, will be used as a pilot program to ultimately fold the climate agenda of the United Nations into the entire curriculum. And here from my last point from this particular article, in other words, under the guise of studying math, science, or geography, students will be actually inculcated with propaganda about the so-called climate emergency and the solutions to alleged crisis, including population control, carbon taxes, global wealth redistribution, offered by experts such as Jeffrey Sachs of the Harvard Institute for International Development and Keith Raworth of Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute, both of whom will be advising the ministry as it prepares its curriculum. So here you have all this movement and all this influence and indoctrination of children. They're fear-mongering and basically shaping these children's lives in the image in a control. It's a control. It's a global tax. So they're using these children to promote the UN Agenda 2030 with no regard for states' sovereignty or national sovereignty. And that's very un-American. And it's also, for here in the States, anything like that would be devastating to American sovereignty, including mass migration, including anything that suppresses the right, population growth. I mean, these alarmist platforms. It's a total undermining of American values, American sovereignty, and of course, it would also what the left wants. It would inspire larger government, more government would be involved. The foreign entanglements would be even more. There would be the transparency in the foreign relations would be. It would just explode. It would be huge. It would grow, and the fiscal responsibility, and suppressing our economy. That's basically, we're the top economy. And we have not succumbed to these secular values and to the mass immigration and to what I consider the colonial legacy or the white guilt that they are using to control and to create the narrative, to support their narrative. So I will be happy to bring you guys much more information this year on these subjects. And I will be bringing you new formats and new templates going forward in the new year. And we'll have a regular live stream show. And of course, if you will hit your bell for your notifications and likes in order to subscribe. And I thank you so much again for joining me on this very first segment of 2020 Black Spring with Autumn. Happy New Year.